It's ready for run. It's now in
So you
the
double click right
transfer
on this
file.
one.
So that's a brand new column, so he did bring up a very good point. If it's a brand new column and it hasn't really been run much, columns do have a conditioning process whereby they need to be run, and you need to coat the active sites within the column to get it so that you can run, you know.
Yep.
So it might take some time to get that column set up. And then again, tomorrow we have the ion optics column, the Aurora column that I'd like to put on and set up with your column heater so that you can run with that higher capacity or higher performance column. But I wanted to get started with what you have here.
Yeah, just one like familiar with how to use that liquid junction.
Yeah, I think we're going to start right off the bat tomorrow with that. But right now, I wanted to get you comfortable with building methods, make sure that you understand how to build methods. So you have a couple different type of methods for the not intact, but for the global proteomics, high load, low load, and then the TMT. Because if you're going to run, are you planning on running TMT as part of it? Okay. Yeah. Well, I want you to because Angelito he stressed that we want to do that. So, all right. So let's go back to your method builder. So you've got this set up to do this wash method here, and all we really did was let's see, okay, that's your training method. So we just made some changes and made a wash method. Now I brought in, so I took your training method and I cleared the experiment here. And it's already saved, so we don't have to worry about anything. But what I wanted to do was bring in some other options here so we can build off of those. And what I'm going to do is bring in a ID, and I'm going to grab this low load, so less than 500 nanograms. So we're going to leave the little parameters from that method. All right. So everything is basically, we basically kept all the parameters that we wanted to. But so let's walk through the typical parameters that we need to change. So I grabbed that low load template, and again, we would ask us to do the expected peak width. I'm going to say 20. It's doing full scan, 120,000 resolution, which I would recommend. 300% ABC target. But instead of an auto, we're going to give it 25 milliseconds in order to fill the IRM. I would actually jump this up to 50 milliseconds to give us enough time to fill. This value, we can look at this value in our data and determine if we're reaching our max IT time. So I'm going to show you that in some of your data. So if we look at this sample here, whatever it may be, I can look in the scan header and I can tell you where we stand here. So I'm going to go to View, Report, Review, Scan Header, and I can look at full ion or full MS. So let's find one in here. Okay, so this is the full MS at scan number 10,894. It's right at that retention time of 25.98. This is a full MS here, whatever it was seeing, full MS. If I go back and view spectrum, okay, there's really not a whole lot that's interesting there. Oh, because it's blown out, my fault. Let's find a good one. So we've got some masses here. We've got some ions, probably some peptides in there. If we dig down into it, we see some multiply charged species in there. Okay. So at this retention time of 26.03, scan number 11,705, for example, we're seeing an intensity total at that scan of 1 e to the 9. Now, even Angelito noticed this when we were here. 1e10, he said we definitely need to dilute that sample, which is correct with what you agree with. If you don't know what we were working with here, we just have to kind of try to take a shot in the dark to figure it out. But, so if you look at this scan here, and if I go view scan header, this brings up another piece of information that we can use for our purposes. So, first and foremost, give us our total ion current, our scan range, the retention time, scan number, all that stuff, our base peak mass, what scan mode we're in, FPMS, positive, full, nanospray, full. Down here in this scan description, this is really where I want to focus. So this is, I don't know if you've read these before, but what this gives us is it gives us an idea of whatever our settings were for automatic gain control, were those settings correct based on the actual raw data. So based on the raw data, it tells us that we did multiple injections, okay? And this II is an indicator that we did something called multiple injections. So with this scan range here, 350 to 1200, or 350 to 1200, no, actually we did 350 to 1500. Based on that, the RF in the RF potential in the electrodynamic ion funnel, in order to push ions through here, we create a RF amplitude to push things through. Okay, so this is essentially a bunch of multipoles stacked. So we have an RF voltage to push this through. Depending on your mass range here, if the last mass is greater than 4 times this first mass, it will create 2 waveforms to push this through, 2 voltages. This is why we see this multiple injection II. It just means that it needs 2 voltages to push through that range of masses. So it doesn't hurt you at all. It just means that there's multiple injections. Okay, that's how you read it. Along with those injections, we have 2 injection times. So the injection time to push through 350 to whatever 350 times 4 is, and then everything greater than that. So let me show you from here.
1400.
1400?
Yeah, for
sure. All right, so it'll push through 350 to 1400, and then 1401 to 1500. So it makes 2 pushes. Okay, and for each push, it tells us how long it took to fill the ion routing multipole. So from 350 to 1400, it took 0.11 milliseconds, and for the 1401 to 1500, it took 0.11 milliseconds, for a total of 0.22 milliseconds, or about 0.217 milliseconds. That's how long we gave how long the instrument actually took, based on the intensity of your sample. That makes sense to me, because it's a very, very concentrated sample. Okay, and in our method, I'm just going to reopen that file. I'm just going to open it back up. Opening instrument method is always slow. So our method file, method editor, we said we want 3 million ions for MS1, and we're going to automate injection time. And then based on our data, it automatically capped off at 0.217 milliseconds in order to fill with 3 million ions. Okay, so if you want to know how long it took, go there. So long story short, when I'm building my methods, I either choose auto or I give it X amount of time to do it. So when I'm building your new method here for, I'm going to go to the template, go to ID, and I'm going to go into low load, less than 500 nanograms. In this method, the only difference we change here is we're going to give a maximum injection time of 25 milliseconds. And I would actually recommend that we bump it up to 50 for this method, just to ensure that for something that we're doing for a low amount, we're actually able to get that value. And then for pull up in my Orbitrap Exploris 480 method editor.
But it will cut, right? So I mean, once it's filled,
It's done.
right? So
It moves
it
on.
won't necessarily long. I mean, be waiting for a bit longer. Yeah.
Yep. Once it's full, it's full.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but I was just showing you that an example of where we showed that it was full.
Yeah, where we are. Yeah.
And then, not in this case, they didn't bump it up. This was just mimicking single cell. But they were doing a single cell TMT. They actually, the company I was at, they were actually bumping their threshold to 8,000 or 10,000, because with TMT you're multiplexing samples together. 5,000 intensity. Charge states are going to stay the same, 2 to 6. Dynamic exclusion, I would do 2 times the peak width at either 15 or 20. Let's make it 20, and then make our duration 40 milliseconds, or 40 seconds, excuse me. And then with our data-dependent MS2 for a low load, instead of doing an auto, we're going to up this value. And everything is pretty much going to stay the same. This method recommends a 30% collision energy. I would recommend a 35. The template, remember the last one we made, the template gave us an isolation window, the 1.6. They have theirs set at 2. I think that's a little bit wide. Remember, if you make it wider, you'll let more intensity through potentially. 1.6 is good enough. Define first mass, 100, 110. AGC target at standard. So they weren't doing any custom, so they wanted 100,000 ions, and then they did their max injection time at 40 milliseconds. So 40 milliseconds will break my rule a little bit. So 40 milliseconds will break my 40 milliseconds will break my wrong instrument. Guys. So at 15,000, 40 milliseconds pushes us beyond that 32 millisecond transient time for our MS2 Orbitrap scan. So we're going a little bit longer in order to give us better ion statistics, which is absolutely justified. And then if I were running samples at low loads, I would actually optimize this value in particular. And I would make it longer and slightly shorter, and I would actually see how the data responds to making those changes. So I would make it go in increments of 5 or 10 to up the data-dependent MS2 max injection time. Because that's really one of the, and we don't really have a nice table in here. For the QEs, they used to have a nice table that kind of went through that, but it's a bit of a different instrument. But the one thing I can tell you for sure, as we're going to lower amounts, and I'm just taking this from a single cell method here. Really, what we're doing in order to get more ions in the IRM for MS2. It breaks our rule a little bit. Breaks our rule of not trying to go above that fill time or the transient time, but it gives us better ion consistency. So when you're going to lower amounts injected, that to me is the most critical setting you can do, and that goes for pretty much any Orbitrap type instrument. Okay? So keep in mind your table, your transient table, but try to for higher load samples, try to stay around the transient length, try to stay around the value for the transient length so that you get the best efficiency. But if you need better ions, extend out your max FT time. That's my rule of thumb.
This is the same as the theory will be the same as MS1, right? If we want to have a more ions.
You made it 0.2, right?
Yes,
You made that 0.2 so that it loads a little bit quicker. And that should be 80 minutes. And this should be 80 minutes. And you can go ahead and save it. Call it training method 2 or low load. So now you can clear your experiment. All right, now go into templates and go to TMT. Okay, TMT, TKO standard QC MS2. Drag that one over. You gotta drag it into the oval, and just say yes. All right, so what are we missing here? All right, so MIPS, intensity, precursor fit, charge state, dynamic exclusion. Okay, so we need to go over here. Grab that precursor fit and drag it over.
It's here.
Drop it above, between intensity and charge state.
Okay, here.
Yeah. See if it'll drag it and drop it for you. Do it again, just put it wherever it wants to go.
Yeah,
Just put it there. Okay, put it automatically where it needs to go.
Oh, okay.
All right. Okay. All right. So let's go in and build the method. All right. So let's start with full scan.
So we select all the time.
We'll go and make our gradient. We'll do our gradient when we're done with it. Okay. So pretty standard. Okay. 120,000 resolution. You can make your expected peak width, because we don't know what it is. Set it for 20. Okay. Because and then always want advanced peak determination on, because advanced peak determination gives us what? What does it give us? What information does it give us? It's critical. Gives us the charge state, and charge state is going to be appropriate for us to know for our fragmentation. Okay. 120,000 resolution for MS1. For the range, you could do 400 to 1400. Yeah, make it 400 to 1400. And if we set it up like that, are we going to be in trouble? We're not going to have any trouble, but are we going to do a single or a double RF amplitude to push stuff through the electrodynamic ion funnel? Remember we talked about that rule?
I think it's single.
Single.
Yeah, because it's less than 4.
But yeah, less than 400. Okay. So 400. So if it was 1600, if it was more than 1600, it would pass through there. Okay. I would say the rest of it is okay. Your AGC target, in this method they had it at 250%, 250% of standard. So that's going to be 2.5 million ions. I would just leave it at standard. Leave it at 3 million. Okay. Maximum injection time 50. 50 is a good solid number, because we're giving ourselves enough time to accumulate. And again, we can look at our data and tell us whether that's not the. If we need to go longer, we can always set it. But for most applications, I'm not going to worry about that. Microscans. I didn't talk about microscans. Microscans we don't need to do anything with proteomics. Micros,
That's right.
yeah, we don't change it for proteomics. We use microscans when we're doing intact mass because that's basically signal averaging. Okay, so we're parking on a peak and we're doing multiple scans. We don't need to do that in proteomics. It doesn't help us at all. But for intact mass, we do that. Other things, profile. We have the choice to do profile and centroid. I always choose profile for full scan because we want as rich data as we can, as the richest data we can. Profile is going to give us our we're in profile mode. We're not centroiding the data at that point, so we're not looking at centroiding the data, and we're not looking across. So centroided data would be rounded instead of these stick type spectra, and we're going to get more information out of it. Okay. Next one down. NIPS. Oh, and source fragmentation. There's a little box for source fragmentation. If you wanted
We
to
don't
do,
use it.
we don't use it, but that's where you would.
Because
control.
that's what you mentioned at the beginning. Right?
Yeah, you fragment there. Yeah. All right. Oh, do you want to set up your AMG sample to run while we're doing this?
And
Yeah, you're
oh, you
blank.
mean
You're,
a new program?
yeah, your blank just finished. So, this is something you could do when you're doing your method development here in the lab. Because remember what I talked about. If you, from my scribbling notes here, if we set it to fragment at 5,000 or 10,000, we're actually telling it. Yeah, we're gonna up the threshold by which we start to let something become fragmented. So the higher we go, the more intense the precursors are going to be. But we already know that with TMT, we're already artificially there because we're multiplexed the samples. So it can give you better data, better fragmentation to go with the higher level. So I would start it at 10,000. And then see how your data looks, and perhaps set up a couple iterations of this at 10, 20, and maybe like 50,000, 10, 25, and like 50,000 to see what your data looks like. Okay. Precursor fit. It's coming in orange. There's a reason why why it's doing that. We're going to come back to that in a couple minutes. So just leave that as is for right now. Charge state 2 to 6. That's appropriate. So doubly charged up to 6+ charges. Okay, perfect. Data dependent MS2, or your dynamic exclusion. So your dynamic exclusion for this, all right, so go back up to your, scroll all the way up to the top there. So your expected peak width is 20 seconds. So typically 2 to 3 times your peak width. So 2 times your peak width would be 40, 3 times would be 60. This is something when you're doing method development, I would recommend to do 2 times your exclusion duration, do 2 times your peak width at base for your first exclusion duration, and then rerun it at 3 times your exclusion duration. Okay? And also we're going to exclude isotopes. Okay? That's clicked. And then we're going to perform the dependent scan. So if you hover over the next one, the next box down, when checked, yeah, leave it clicked, leave it selected. When checked, only a single charge state will be analyzed for a given analyte, after which all charge states will be added to the exclusion.
Not where we want.
Yeah. So what's that?
We are not only analyzing a single charge, right?
Right.
That's why we need to.
Yep, exactly. All right, so we're good for that. Now, data-dependent mass spec. Okay, now we're going to tie the 2 of these together. Okay, so click on that icon. As we open that up, so there's a couple things we can do here. One, we need to make sure that our collision energy, well, first of all, our isolation width, okay, it's set for 0.4. If you look up at the top, 0.4.
Yeah, it means each one only 0.3.
Right. So I want to make this one 0.7. So for TMT, we want to be a little more narrow on this because remember, we're isolating peptides that have modifications,
Yes.
and we want to try to get rid of any of the compression that we might get because there's other things competing against those. All those.
Instead of modification, it could be like other peptides, non-modification peptides.
Exactly.
And show the
similar masses. So we want to be a little bit more strict, okay? But remember, this is it's gonna decrease our transmission a little bit, our transmission efficiency a little bit, but it's going to help us with specificity here. So I want to make that 0.7. Now I want to tie these two together. So go back to precursor fit and make your fit window 70% and 0.7. Now they're happy. Now they're happy. So this theoretical precursor envelope, this is specific for doing like TMT stuff. Okay. So the theoretical precursor envelope is basically going to look at the isotopic envelopes around the TMT peptides, and it's going to try to fit those. It's basically a filter which allows us to do some purity assessment. So it's going to add it's going to apply a theoretical envelope and try to match things. So I would always recommend to use that precursor fit. And then so if we hover over it, precursor fit is a comparison of the theoretical precursor envelope to the observed envelope. The precursor fit normalizes for the theoretical and observed envelopes within the fit window must be above the fit threshold to pass the. And then your Orbitrap resolution. Okay, so Orbitrap resolution. In order to get good resolution on the isotopologs from the TMT reagents, TMT reagent labeled peptides, we recommend you doing a 45,000 resolution. That's a special resolution that works well with TMT reagents. Okay, 45,000 resolution. And then we're going to build some Phi-SDM methods on top of that, which are the TMT, the turbo TMT. All right, so leave that at 45,000, and then with the scan range for defining first mass, we want to define our first mass at least like 100, 110. The higher we set this number, if we set this number too high, it might cut off based on the reporter ions for the TMT. So let's set this at 110 when it already is set. Okay. All right. Your AGC target. Let's do a customized AGC target. Okay. So we want good ion statistics here. So now we're going to break our rule a little bit. So we're not really break our rule. We're going to stack the deck in our favor. So instead of 100,000, we're going to go with 200,000%. So we want 200,000 ions we want 200,000 ions for our AGC fill on our MS2. So we want good ion statistics. We want a lot of ions in there. And then if you look at the max injection time, okay, it says custom. So if I go to my table for the 45,000, 96 minus 10, it recommends that 86 at 86. But so if you click between auto and custom, it always gives you the value that's paired with your Orbitrap resolution. Okay. But what I'm going to recommend for you for this experiment is to actually bump it up. Okay. So I mean, and again, there you go. So 120. What I'm going to recommend to you is 120. Okay. So it's going to give you a little bit more. So it's not going to fit the, again, we're going to break our rule. It's not going to fit. So we're actually running it more of a transient length of around 60,000 resolution. But it's going to buy us a little bit better ion statistics. Okay. So we're going to break the rule a little bit because we want a little bit higher number of ions in there. And you're done. You're done with the mass specs. Questions?